Bad, or at least negative things can happen to all of us. However, what I have also noticed is that often, over the course of time, it can become apparent that at least some of these negative events caused us to divert down a path which ultimately served to constructively create a positive end. And when we look back on the event, it also becomes apparent that if this negative event had not happened, our life could well have ended up going down a path of being worse than what it is now. One example that happened to me was when I was once working in a call centre. I had been to university and got my degree. Having made a conscious decision to pursue a path of following my heart, I had chosen psychology as a subject. This being a more generic subject than anything more vocational, such as engineering or chemistry, I couldn't just walk into a job as a psychologist. More training was necessary. So after leaving university, I ended up starting again from scratch, doing data entry temping work, which then led to customer services temping work, which then led to a full-time job in customer services. And this was the worst job I've ever done, by a long shot. Working conditions were bad, the employer was uncaring and ruthless, and there were no perks to the job whatsoever. But I was still in the mindset of having to have a job in order to pay the rent, being completely unaware of something called housing benefit at the time. I can't remember when I met her, but a woman joined the team who I got on really well with, and we dated for a brief period of time. It was her decision to end this, stating that she felt that at that moment in time she wasn't ready for a relationship. But she was still warm and friendly and asked if we could remain friends. Unfortunately, by this point, I had fallen head over heels in love with her. As such, seeing her at work every day in what was already a stressful job was upsetting and triggering for me, to the point where it created a mini mental breakdown, the only one I have ever had in my life so far. Getting to work involved catching a bus into the city centre and then another bus from the city centre to my place of work. One day, I caught the bus into the city centre but just couldn't go any further. This went way beyond a conscious decision. It was like a huge force. A giant finger was pushing me back home. I just couldn't carry on. I then caught the bus home, and when I got home I rang in sick. I then spent a couple of days lying in bed staring at the ceiling. I then made the decision to resign. I then spent time off work while I looked for another job, living on what savings I had. After 2 months, I was able to find a job with the local council which had better pay and better conditions, and this job also put me on a path which ultimately led to the career I have now as a mental health nurse. The truth of the matter is that if I had not fallen in love with that woman and had my heart broken, I would probably not have descended into a mental breakdown and would have continued working in that job indefinitely. And then how much longer would I have then been stuck in that rut for? Here we have an example of how at the time a bad thing happened to me, but ultimately looking back it was something that had to happen in order for me to be able to move on. There are other examples that I can think of from my life, which I will outline later in this book. In the meantime, think about any examples from your own life as to when this might have happened to you.